Yes, who I saw? Hey, I hung out with their friend. Yes, I love to his house. Yeah, he asked me about a book. Yeah, y'all guys. I'm actually going to be here till the meeting, so I'm just going to be okay. Yeah, what's the name?
Did they show you the
Oh, wow. I mean, everybody was fighting for it. She showed up. And then, like, people about you, so they would pick lunch up and I sat there asking a lot. So we got to do this. It was a secret conversation for 2 weeks. I went over there to
See everybody this morning. Thanks for being here. Thanks for reassembling for our journey through Numbers. Let's start out this morning by standing and singing together hymn number 62. Hymn number 62, Come Thou Fount. Great to see everybody this morning. Thanks for being with us today. I chose that hymn this morning, but not because it has anything to do necessarily with the book of Numbers. It's actually a song that in some ways references the end of this journey through the wilderness. I've been reading the book of Joshua over the last few days. That's kind of my morning devotional right now, and I'm kind of thinking it's kind of a good setup. What we're doing now is a good setup to talk about Joshua in the future. But of course, I just read the passage about the setting out the marker stones, the memorial stones, which is, of course, what an Ebenezer is, marker stone, a memorial stone. And I was thinking about that. I thought, this is, what a great hymn. So that's what we'll sing this morning. So thanks for singing along. It's wonderful to have you all together again today. Let me just remind you of a couple things coming up. You've heard me talk a lot about our 175th anniversary celebration. Well, don't forget that our celebration will be really kind of coming together on the 24th of October. On that Sunday, we're going to have a great special worship service talking about the history of our church, talking about the future of our church. Dr. Ligon Duncan, who is the Chancellor of Reformed Theological Seminary, is going to be our guest speaker for that morning and also for a special session that night. And so we're just looking forward to a big weekend. There's going to be a fantastic reception with great food that many of you all have prepared. You may not know that, but once again, our chefs here at the church are going to be using your recipes from our own First Pres cookbook, because we've done that a couple times on a couple of different occasions, and that has just been a fantastic way to sort of cater an event here at the church. So please plan on being here for the 24th of October. Jay will be playing during the reception, just kind of doing what he does here every morning. I hope you all come in a little bit early and get to hear him just sort of improvising on the piano. He is such an amazing talent and such a gift to this church. So he'll be doing that during our reception and celebration on Sunday morning on the 24th. But I really do hope you'll make plans. Look for all of the information about this. It's on every screen, on every device, and every app that we have. So there's lots of information out there, but we hope that you'll be a part of that in just a few weeks. All right, I promised you drama last week in the book of Numbers. It's going to continue. Lots more drama this week. I hope you did your reading. You know what's coming. But we are, of course, studying about the Hebrew journey through the wilderness. And we are really, last week we talked about the fact that after being at Sinai for so long, the people packed up the ark, the Shekinah moved, the camp moved, the tabernacle moved, and all the people began to move. And the idea was that they would move and then they would come to the promised land and then enter the promised land. Well, today we're going to find out why it took them 40 years to travel about this far. Because it was really not a case of distance. It was not a case of endurance. It was not a case of directions or getting lost. It was really about attitude. Really, it started with attitude manifest in rebellion. I remember when I was a camp counselor, there was a plaque that was hanging in our staff meeting room at the camp where I worked, and it was it had a quote from Charles Swindoll, and it said that 90% of life is attitude, 10% is actually what happens to us. And I think that is so true. And I think that we're going to see that in large ways today when we study the book of Numbers. Today, the book of Numbers, we're hitting another one of those big themes of the book, and that's the theme of rebellion. You'll see the big box at the top of your outline. This is from the ESV Study Bible, but I want to highlight that last sentence. It says, "Israel rebelled against God." Rebellion did not start with an uprising, but with griping and murmuring against Moses and God. Remember last week we talked about the complaints of the people. Complaints are not morally neutral. Complaints lead to a changed mind, which lead to a changed heart, which then create attitudes, which then affect our actions. And so as we think about, where did the rebellion of Israel start? It really started in griping about the menu. When you have a heart of discontent, it just grows. It's fascinating that our appetites, whatever they are, only understand one word. And the one word that our appetites understand is the word more. And whether it's an appetite for money or social media or food or even just an appetite for dissatisfaction. It just grows and it grows and it grows. And what started out as complaining became out and out rebellion. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And why is rebellion such an important issue in the Bible? Why is this such an important theme in this book? And what does it have to say to us as we think about the book of Numbers? Let me begin by illustrating something that just happened this weekend. So Morgan was off at the University of Oklahoma with Elle this weekend, just doing some good mama duties and things like that, just being up there with Elle, just helping her with some things. And so Bo and I were at home by ourselves this weekend, and we did a lot of different stuff. But one of the things that we like to do together is watch movies. And so Bo loves it when I bring up old movies from high school, or old comedies, or old kind of action buddy movies, stuff like that aren't new, but he likes to watch them, and we just kind of watch them and laugh about them together. And so this past weekend we watched a movie. It's an old Robert De Niro and Robert Grodin, or Charles Grodin film called Midnight Run. It's just a kind of an old buddy movie about this bounty hunter takes this guy who's an accountant. He's saving him from the mob. The whole point is he has to get him from New York to Los Angeles, and the guy's always trying to escape. But it all takes place in about 1986. At least that's when the movie came out, was in 1986. And I'm sitting here laughing at the dialogue, and I just hadn't seen this movie in a few years, and I'm kind of worried a little bit about the profanity, because whenever I watch it on network, they take care of all that. And I'm realizing when I'm here with my son, it's like, oh, okay, I should have been more careful about this. But, laughing about the dialogue, the scenes are funny, I love Robert De Niro, all this kind of stuff. And I noticed that Bo is laughing about different things. And I said, what's so funny? He says, every time they need to call somebody, they have to go to a payphone. I mean, because again, these guys are moving across the country, and every time Robert De Niro has to call his contact back in Los Angeles, moving from New York, he has to go to a payphone or use somebody else's phone. And Bo said, it's really funny is if you know that number, you can call that payphone from anywhere, and if somebody's there, they can pick it up and talk to them. And it's like, yeah, that's because in the old days, if you called somebody on the phone, you never had to ask, where are you? Because you were wherever that phone was, because it was connected by a cable to the ground. And so a phone number was not just a computer code, it was a location. And so he thought that was funny. The other thing that just blew him away, the big part, one of the opening scenes of the movie is trying to put this this guy on bail on a plane. And I'm just sitting here, watching the movie, and he says, Dad, they're smoking on the plane. He says, you can't smoke on a plane. I said, you could back then. He says, they're smoking in the airport. They're smoking everywhere. Everybody in this, babies in this movie were smoking. It's everybody's smoking. And it's just, it just reminds us, he was born in 2003. It's like, this is hilarious. This is the new stuff. But what it kind of reminded me of is that kids don't know what they don't know. And you're going to hear me talk about this a little bit. I'm kind of giving you a little bit of my preview for this Sunday. But when we talk about Christian education and studying the Bible and all that kind of stuff, it's really important to remember that when we're talking about this stuff, it's important because people don't know what they don't know. The problem with a lot of teenagers right now, and it's teenagers have always been in rebellion. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the problem with kids today is because of these devices, they have unlimited access to all kinds of information and all kinds of resources and all kinds of opinions and good and bad, helpful and evil, all those kinds of things. The problem is when they ask Google a question, which statistically speaking, they do more often than they ask adults in their lives now. If they've got a problem, most kids now turn to Google first or to the internet first before they ask anybody with actual skin. But what happens is, they get an answer. If they don't like that answer, they go find another answer until they find one they like. The problem is in all that, they don't know what they don't know. So they might get the answer to their question, but they don't know the context or the situation around that answer. They may not know the realities around that answer. And so they don't know what they don't know. And yet that becomes the sort of the thing that sparks or foments all kinds of rebellion in teenagers and young adults and others. That's not just limited to that age group, but that is something that happens. We don't know what we don't know. What we do know is ourselves, and we know our own feelings, or at least we think we know our own feelings. We know our own thoughts, and what we discover is that rebellion is part of our fallen human nature, so much so that it infects just about every part of our lives. If you think back to the book of Genesis, what was the original sin? And if anybody says sex in here, I know you grew up in the Catholic Church. Sex was not the original sin. What was the original sin? Disobeying God, which is what? Rebellion. And what is the root of rebellion? The root of rebellion, and the root specifically of the rebellion with which Adam and Eve were tempted, was the idea that you can know as much as God does. I mean, again, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's not just what's good, what's bad. That's an idea of you're going to know everything God does. You're going to be, and that will make you like God. That'll put you on par with God. When Satan says that, that you will be like God, what he's saying, the construct there is that you're going to be on par with God. Yeah, well, that's right, yeah. But you're going to be on par with God. And ultimately, that is the rebellion into which Satan wants to draw all of us. The idea that we don't need God, that we can be like God, that we can be on par with God, and in a sense, that we can be our own gods. There's a word that really describes the idea of human rebellion. It's the word autonomous. Now, darn it, I didn't pull over here, let me pull this over. The word autonomous is, of course, a construct. And you all are familiar with the word. Autonomous, sorry, we are really going to have to improve our magic marker budget around here. Autonomous. What does the word auto mean? What does the prefix auto mean? Automatic, yeah. But what does it mean? That's right, I heard it. Self. Yeah. Now, the second part of the word you may not recognize, but the second part of the word is this word here, nomos, or conjugated out. What does the word nomos mean? That's right, it's the Greek word for law. And so the word autonomous literally means that you are a law unto yourself. That you are your own, or the person who is claiming autonomy is the one who is the law, or the highest law to which he or she or it has to answer. So the desire for autonomy means the desire to be a law unto yourself. And rebellion is at its heart a striving for autonomy. And when we think about original sin, we see evidence of this everywhere. If you want evidence, if you want a laboratory for rebellion and autonomy, I invite you to our playground. You're like, what? Yes, that is a living laboratory of original sin. People are like, what do you mean? That's crazy. Kids are nice. Kids are wonderful. Kids are sweet. Really? How many of you have ever actually met a toddler? When a toddler is in the middle of a night, or excuse me, an infant in the middle of the night, when it begins screaming, what is it saying in its infantile way? It's saying, of course, we all know, Mother, thank you for all you do for me. I hope you're getting a good night's sleep. I don't want to disturb you. I'm not going to. Stay in bed. Stay in bed. Stay in bed. That's what they're screaming, right? No, they're screaming what? I'm hungry. I'm uncomfortable. Pay attention to me. I'm bored. I'm lonely. And everything focuses on them. Then they get older, and that starts to take another phase. It goes into the terrible twos. And suddenly they discover the word no. But they also discover other words as their speech develops. Words and phrases like, you're not the boss of me. or I can do it myself. Nobody taught them that. That is something that is part of us. That is, and it's not just part of human development, except in as much as part of human development is learning to live through original sin, rebellion, the belief that we will be autonomous, that we are law unto ourselves. Rebellion is the active expression of autonomy. And what we see in this episode today, as we're talking about the Israelites moving into the promised land, or presumably moving into the promised land, is a rebellion of autonomy, where they think, I know better. I know better for me. I know better than you. Keep your hands off my life. You're not the boss of me. That's what we're dealing with. And if you think that this is just history, this is not just history. This is psychology. This is front page news. Rebellion against God is based on something deep inside of each one of us. Tony Campolo once said that a parent's job is to set boundaries. A teenager's job is to push boundaries. Apparently, we are all teenagers. We never grow out of that. Let's turn to chapter 13. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. And so 12 men were chosen to scout out the land of Canaan. They've gotten to the land of Canaan. They're there, but as any prudent leader does, let's check out the ground before we go. And so Moses sends these 12 men into the land, and among them are Caleb from the tribe of Judah and Joshua from the tribe of Ephraim. Now, what is the nature of the mission? What are they supposed to do? They're supposed to go find out what the inhabitants of the land are like, and they're supposed to bring back samples of the crops grown in the land. It's fascinating that if you go back and you read stories about the early explorers in the 1700s, 1400s, 1500s, when they came to the quote unquote the New World, when they came to North America, Latin America, to the Caribbean, just the number of journals they took, just these amazing sort of rhapsodic descriptions of things like corn, or things that they'd never seen before, like I don't know, like kudzu, or these things. If you don't know what kudzu is, and you're not from the Southeast, but just all these exotic plants. Thank you, Alex, for the fist bump back there. And he knows what kudzu is. I mean, all these, the birds, the reptiles, all of these things that they never seen before. What Moses wants them to do is go in, look at the land, check it out. I think that the purpose of this mission was to go in, get these guys excited, and say, all right, check it out. This is a land flowing with milk and honey. Look at they go out, they find these grapes that are so big they have to carry the bunches of them between them on sticks. They've incredible plants. There are all kinds of things happening. It's not even a total wilderness. It's not like they have to go in and clear forest land or anything. There is already all this stuff. There are people there. There's all this is just waiting for them. And that's part of the problem. On the one hand, it is great, but on the other hand, there are other people already there. So they went up, look at verse 21. So they went up and they spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob near Lebo Hamath. I'm going to go ahead and read all these because I always make other people read them, and I think it's only fair that I do it. To Sheshai and Tamai, the descendants of Anak were there. Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Zoan, interestingly, is the city that they came from, or possibly one of the cities they came from in Egypt. For those of you who are Raiders of the Lost Ark fans, that's also the city of Tanis, just FYI, where they found the Lost Ark and the first Raiders of the Ark movie. That's not history, actually, just fun trivia. And they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between the two of them, and they also brought some pomegranates and figs. And the place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster that the people of Israel cut down from there. So you see, I mean, just all those place names, indicates that they actually made a pretty deep excursion into the land. I mean, you look at where they started down here at this area, at this place called Kadesh Barnea, and they went all the way up here past the Sea of Galilee. I mean, this is actually, you see Damascus here. This is all the way up into what we would now call Syria. So they really did penetrate quite deeply into Canaan. They didn't just go across the line, look around, and come back. They were there for long enough to really get a good sense of what was there. So they were gone for 40 days. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." I mean, check it out. It is beautiful. This is a paradise. It's everything that we had hoped it would be. I've never understood the expression "a land flowing with milk and honey." All I can guess is that means it's awesome. I mean, I don't ever know if there was a place that actually flowed with these things, like rivers of milk, rivers of honey. That just seems bizarre to me. But obviously, these are things of luxury. These are things of high price. These are things that as symbols that indicate that there is a richness to this land. And they came back and said, "This place is incredible. It is wonderful. It is everything we hoped it would be." And you would think that at that point, they would say, at that point, they would say, "Let's go. Let's pack up today. Let's get in there." But that's not what happened, because we hear this. They said also, "However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of Negev, and the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan." So even though there is all this waiting for them, they say, if only it was empty. If only it was low-hanging fruit. If only it was there just for us to pick up off the ground. But unfortunately, the sons of Anak are there. What does that mean? Well, the sons of Anak were, this group of people, and this goes into a whole different sort of stream of interesting sort of theological thinking. The sons of Anak were reportedly the children or the descendants of a race of people mentioned in Genesis called the Nephilim. The Nephilim were supposedly the giants who, or the spiritual creatures who came and intermingled with humanity. Now, there is all kinds of scholarly debate about who the Nephilim were. Were they the sons of Cain? Were they the sons, as opposed to the sons of Seth? Were they angelic beings? Were they, what exactly were they? How long did they live? Did they survive the flood? All these kinds of things. What was happening? Were they human? Were they something else? Were they ogres? Whatever it was, we see even in other ancient, other ancient types of depictions, the idea of giants. Giants sort of permeate every mythology, every culture. Even if you go up to Scandinavia at this point, the chief, the chief enemies of humanity were the giants that they faced. You see that, in just about every culture, that there is, there's this idea that they're, that like we're the regular people, but there's this race of giant people out there who are out to kill us. You think about the Cyclops in Odysseus, even in some mythologies, you've got a whole level of gods, and then you got a whole level of bigger gods like the Titans, for example, in Greek mythology. But the idea was that they were there. Their cities were fortified. They were huge, and that they were unbeatable. And this is really, this is really the crux. As a matter of fact, one of the reports comes, they say they're so big that we look like grasshoppers compared to them. They are so large, they're so mighty that we cannot compare to them. Now, here's the problem. So they let's see, they brought back word about all that. However, the people of the land who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. In addition to the Anakim, in addition to these giants, you also have the Amorites, the Amalekites, the Jebusites. You've also got plenty of sort of regular human enemies as well. It's going to be impossible to take this land. It's going to be impossible. We can't do it. So here's the report that comes back from the spies. First of all, it's that this land is everything that God promised, but we can't take it because the danger is too great, the risk is too great, the enemies are too great, the obstacles are too great. I want you to consider those two propositions. This is the land God promised, but the obstacles are too great. What we have here is a collision between the reality that they were observing and their trust in the God who made the promise. Because I want you to look, even in this depiction, this is probably a Sumerian or Babylonian, I can't remember, but in this depiction of a giant killing a man here, dude's pretty big. Twice the size of these guys over here. But is he bigger than God? Is he bigger than Pharaoh even? Maybe physically bigger than Pharaoh, but is he more, are they more powerful than Pharaoh? Remember, God has already proven himself in battle multiple times at this point. The greatest of which was in his battle against Pharaoh. And he didn't even fight fair in that one. In every other battle since, what's happened? In every other battle since, God has empowered the people of Israel to do the fighting and given them victory. But it's more of a conventional war, right? In the case of Egypt, God went nuclear. God used all of the powers that are at the disposal of the divine, but not at the disposal of a fake God. And so the plagues of Egypt were not just unfortunate circumstances. Those were the weapons that God used in a battle. Those were the weapons of mass destruction that God used in a battle against the pretender God of Egypt. And, time and time again, God showed, I can muster vermin, I can muster blood in the river, I can muster weather, I can even send death directly if I so choose. There's nothing that can stand against the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, except, in the mind of these scouts, except apparently an NBA player or two. I want us to consider that. Here are these spies who say this place is everything God promised, but we can't go. How disappointing. We saw the giants and we felt like grasshoppers next to them. Well, that was 10 of the spies, but there were 2 who were faithful. Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let's go up at once and occupy the land, for we are able to overcome it." And then the man who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we are." And so they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying that the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. We can't go. I mean, how many times have we gotten to points in our lives when what we observed and the promises of God did not seem to fit, did not seem to align? Before we judge the people of Israel too harshly through lenses of 2,000 years of hindsight, ask yourself this question: have you ever been in this position where you knew something was the right thing to do? You knew that God was going to take care of you. You knew that your identity is grounded in Him and not in what other people think. I mean, this could be in a financial situation. This could be in a health situation. This could be in a social situation. And yet, you back down. I back down. We back down because we said it's too much. You know, I believe that the Lord is with me, but common sense tells me, my eyes tell me, empirical evidence tells me that I shouldn't go. Can anybody in this room relate to that? You don't have to raise your hand. That was rhetorical, but thank you. Hopefully, everybody, including the people who didn't raise their hands on that, know that the truth is we've all been in that situation. We have all come to that point in our lives where we are at the border of whatever promised land it is or whatever challenge it is, and we have stopped because we didn't trust God. And it really does come down to that. It's not just that I don't trust God, it's also that I don't trust God as much as I trust me. Autonomy. If God was the only one around, if God was the only voice in our lives, then we would probably do it. But there's also this other piece that says, you know what? I see what I see, and I know what I know, and I can't do it. I mean, we should not look back at the people of Israel and say, where am I in this picture? Say, I'm Joshua, I'm Caleb. Now, we may not be the spies, but we might be the people in the crowd. Because all of us, Paul says, all of us are guilty of this. Whether in great or small, high crime or misdemeanor, we've all come to that point where God wanted us to go one direction and we didn't want to go that way. And so we went the other way. I want to step back for a second. I think that it's really easy after what is this, 4,000 years of hindsight to look back on a situation like this and say, whew, I wouldn't have done that. Really? We look back at Peter and we say, why didn't he trust, why didn't he stick up for Jesus when Jesus was on trial? Why did all the disciples scatter when Jesus was on the cross? I'll tell you why. It's because they were humans. It's because they were sinful humans who, like all of us, have so deeply cooked into our DNA this survival instinct that we actually are willing to defy God because of it. It's not something we do necessarily morally or willingly in the sense that, but it reminds us that we are all sinners in need of God's grace. We're all sinners in need of God's love. And that's really what happens here. It's a challenge for all of us. It's kind of like whenever I talk about the Sermon on the Mount, a lot of people read the Sermon on the Mount as another do and don't list. These are the things that you're supposed to do if you want to get saved, which is a totally misunderstanding of the gospel. The gospel is not about this is what you do if you want to get saved. The gospel is all about what Christ has done to save you by His grace. But so if the Sermon on the Mount is not a list of things that you have to do to get saved, then what is it? The Sermon on the Mount is an arraignment. In other words, you know what an arraignment is? The arraignment is that part of the trial process where the judge tells you this is what you've been charged with. And so when Jesus is giving on the Sermon on the Mount, what he's saying is, this is what you've been charged with. You think that you haven't sinned? Guess what? There's something here for everybody. We think we're better than the people of Kadesh Barnea. We think we're bolder. We think we're stronger. Maybe not. We all fall into that rebellion. Then all the congregation, it wasn't just the 10 spies, then all the congregation raised a loud cry. I'm in chapter 14. And the people wept that night, and all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt. For real? I mean, think about this. It's like we would rather die in the land of Egypt than die in the promised land. Rather die in slavery than die trying to collect on the promise that God gave us. That's, how many times have we made that choice? We'd rather die in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. There's the rebellion right there. Let's choose a new leader who will take us back to Egypt. What does that mean? It means we don't want a leader. We just want somebody to drive the bus. We're the leaders. All of us, even those of us who profess to be Christians, have a tendency to be backseat drivers. How many of you have ever been driving down the road, usually someplace in Tennessee, and you see the bumper sticker that says, God is my co-pilot? You know what? If you've got a bumper sticker on your license plate that says, God is my co-pilot, you are a heretic. Because if God is your co-pilot, then you're wrong. God is not your co-pilot. God is your driver. God is your pilot. God does not suffer backseat drivers. You all have heard you've all heard the expression, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. You all heard that? Also a heresy. What is that? Why is that a heresy? Because in the middle it says that for some reason God's truth is conditional on my belief of it. Actually, it should be, the Bible says it, that settles it. Because truth doesn't depend on my opinion. And so the challenge for all of us is, what do we do when the circumstances we see don't match up with the promises that have been given? And I am not posing that as a simplistic moralism. That is a hard thing. That is where we live our lives. We live most of our lives on the border of Canaan and Kadesh Barnea. This place will become that place of decision for the Israelites. You may have heard the expression crossing the Rubicon. Crossing the Rubicon is an expression related to Julius Caesar and his decision to come back to Rome with his army. And the idea was that if he crossed the Rubicon River, he was crossing that red line, and that was the point of no return. But what did Caesar do? He crossed the Rubicon and then became the dictator ruler of Rome. Kadesh Barnea is the Hebrew Rubicon. The difference is, instead of crossing it, what do? They back off. I venture to say they do what all the rest of us would have done. Why did? Well, because they were scared. It says right there. It says, our kids are going to die. Our wives are going to die. They're going to eat us up. They're too big for us. I think just good old garden variety fear. But I also think, but it's fear that inspired the rebellion, which is to say, let's choose a new leader. Because one of the underlying parts of the story is that, remember, Moses is not The king of the people, he's what? He's the steward of the people. He's the manager of the people. He's the director of the people. He's the CEO, but he's not the chairman of the board. And so when they're saying we want a new leader, what are they saying? We're not just getting rid of Moses, we're getting rid of who? God. Because it's not Moses who's saying go into the promised land, it's who? It's God who's saying go into the promised land. And so the rebellion here is that if you rebel against this human leader, then you rebel against God. Now, please do not hear me saying, I am not saying if you rebel against your human leaders, then that's the same thing as rebelling against God, unless that's a convenient thing for me to say at an important time in my ministry. But I can't say I haven't played that card. No, I'm just kidding. But what does Moses do? Moses intercedes for them. Look at verse 14, begin verse 13. But Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear of it. But Moses said to the Lord, basically he prayed for them. He said, the Egyptians are going to hear of it. For you brought up this people in your might from among them. And they will tell the inhabitants of this land, they have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people. For you, O Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. But now if you kill this people as one man, then the nations who have heard you of your fame will say, it is because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land that he swore to give to them, that he has killed them in the wilderness. Because what had God said to Moses? God had said, you know what? If these people don't trust me, I'm starting over. That's right. I know he's out of favor and fame, but y'all remember the old Bill Cosby line? He was talking about something his dad once said to him. It's like, son, if you disobey me, I'll take you out and we'll make another one looks just like you. That's essentially what God is saying here. It's like, Moses, I'm going to wipe out this people. I'm going to build up a whole new people from you and your descendants. Basically, he's telling Moses, you're going to be the new Abraham. And Moses says, please don't do that. Why? Because when the people back in Egypt hear of it, they're going to say, see, we told you that God was no good. We told you he can't be trusted. He can't be believed. He can't even protect his people. The Canaanites, they're going to hear, well, why should we fear Yahweh? Why should we fear this one who calls himself I am? He can't even protect and take care of his own people. His own people can't trust him because as soon as he gets mad at them, he wipes them all out. So Moses appeals to God. And please remember, these dialogues between Moses and the Lord, they are not, we can't view them as propositions of systematic theology. We know that God is unchangeable. We know that God knows how this is all going to play out. We know all of these things. But as we look through the human lens, as the Hebrews tell this story, as God relates this story, the way to communicate the gravity of this rebellion is for God to get really ticked off in a way we understand it, because who can't relate to the idea of a child rebelling against you and you just want to rain down heaven on them, or you just want to say, well, that you're done then. I'll take you out and we'll make another one look just like you. Everybody's a parent has felt at some point, you know what? We're just going to start over. It's just that frustration. And the point of the literary style here is to say, it's to really communicate this is how serious this is. God's not playing around. And God says, I'm going to wipe them out. And Moses says, please don't do that. And I love it here. Do you understand the argument that he's making? He's not saying, please don't kill this people because they deserve it. Please don't kill these people because it will hurt them. Please don't kill this people because they're nice people. He's saying, please don't kill this people because it will bring dishonor to your name. Don't hurt your reputation. These people are not worth the damage to the reputation of the holy God. The most important thing to Moses is the name of God, that it be honored throughout the world. That's it. I mean, we tend to look at this and we say, oh, well, God was merciful. Well, God was merciful because he loved his people. Moses was praying, Lord, your name is even more important than this people and even the justice that they deserve. And so what we see in Moses is a tremendous act of clarity and faithfulness, that God's name should be exalted above all things and in all ways. And so Moses pleads with them. And God decides to relent, but in his mercy, he pronounces really two sentences. The first is that the 10 spies who came back and sowed discontent, who sowed the fear, who first refused to trust God, God sends a plague among them and they die. But what else? That was their punishment for the act of rebellion. The act of rebellion is what? The wages of sin is what? Death. It's also the same pronouncement for the rest of the people as well. Because remember, when Adam and Eve ate the apple, and people like to say, oh, well, they didn't die. Yeah, they did. They're not around anymore. They died. They had the potential to live forever. And 900 years compared to forever is pretty quick. But they died. And the people of Israel, though they lived for another 40 years, this generation was not allowed to go into the promised land. God's pronouncement, his judgment against them was, well, you're not going to die, but neither am I going to give you my promise. I'm still going to fulfill my promise. I'm just not going to do it with you. See, that's harsh. That's serious. And, some people would look at that as, we do look at it as a mercy, but we also see it as God's judgment, God's wrath in this case. And of course, then, what's fascinating is that the people say, no, we can do it. Let's go. I mean, have you ever told your kid they were in trouble and all of a sudden they become super good and start like overdoing, like overcompensating? So what did the people do? Moses told these words to all the people of Israel. The people mourned greatly. And they rose early in the morning and went up to the heights of the hill country saying, here we are. We'll go up to the place that the Lord has promised, for we have sinned. And then they try to attack the Amalekites and the Canaanites. And what happens? They're beaten. Because God said, I didn't tell you to do that. I told you to do one thing. I told you to go into the land and claim it. And now you didn't trust me. And now you want to go? Now you take me seriously? I love it. One of my favorite verses in Scripture is Proverbs 9:10, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. What does the fear of the Lord mean? It means that we take God seriously. The problem is that the day before they didn't take God seriously, and that's why God told them that nobody from that generation would pass. He says, "Not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones who said that would become a prey, I will bring in, and they shall know the land that you have rejected. But as for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness for 40 years, and you shall suffer for your faithlessness until the last of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness." Again, the Hebrews didn't get lost. The Hebrews didn't get tired. They were kept out. God said, you had your chance. And I want you to, again, think about that. These are the guys who said, we would rather go back to the land of Egypt. This is not, you could almost excuse it if it was the children who were saying this, because they hadn't seen what God did in Egypt. They hadn't seen what God did at the Red Sea. They hadn't seen what God did in the wilderness. But that whole generation did, and yet they were the ones without faith. They were the ones without faith. I'm sorry, we're out of time. I didn't even get to Korah. We might cover that tell you what, we'll get to that next week. I don't want to shortchange that. I'll bump the schedule a little bit, but it's important. This whole incident of of Kadesh Barnea. I mean, we need to understand. We need to know this. We need to know this story, because Kadesh is one of those. It's one of those place names. It's one of those incidents that keeps coming up again and again. It's kind of like one of those battles. It's one of those battlefields in the spiritual war of Israel that is critical to its history. I mean, in some ways, this is kind of the Gettysburg of the wilderness journey. It's a turning point for them, and it was a decisive battle that never happened. And I really do want to challenge us to think about it as, as this is not just a historical account of something that happened then. It is also a reminder of how our rebellion, our desire for autonomy, plays out again and again and again in our relationship with God. What we do see, though, is that eventually God does fulfill his promise. And what's fascinating is that even though God says, this generation, which is known freedom, you're not going to get there, but the people will. And sometimes we need to think about the people more collectively than individually. This is not to at all step on the idea of a personal relationship with God. But we also have to remember that God had a corporate relationship with Israel. And so even if Reuben doesn't get to the promised land, the tribe of Reuben will. Even if Issachar doesn't get to the promised land, the tribe of Issachar will. And so, and that's a different way of thinking for us. But God is still fulfilling his promises. And I think that, the real takeaway for me whenever I read this story, and it's why I end up dwelling on it so much today, is that we all find ourselves at our own Kadesh Barnea at some point, where we have to ask ourselves, am I going to trust God in spite of what I see in front of my face, in spite of the report of the spies? And also just understand that we have all backed off. We've all been there. And so, just as we would want others and God to deal with us with grace, how do we deal with grace with others when they get to that point and they don't cross into the promised land? Well, I've used up all my time today, and y'all have been, as always, very generous. But we'll pick up the rebellion of Korah, which continues this theme today, and we'll catch that next week. All right? Yeah, sure. It's in there somewhere. I can't remember. That's just that's kind of that'd be kind of like saying Austin, Texas is kind of the area. Texas, that Barnea is kind of the region. Kadesh is the place, or I can't remember. It's Kadesh is kind of the place where they camped. Good question. It's kind of like well, yeah. I won't go into any other complicated stuff. All right, let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and Lord, help us when we read the Old Testament to understand that this is not just ancient history. This is present reality for us spiritually. Help us to understand that through this story, we're not only seeing the rebellion and honestly the fear of your people, we're also seeing those things lurking in us. The good news is, Lord, that this is not the end of the story, and that through your Son Jesus Christ, you have overcome what we could not overcome. That is to say, our fear and our faithlessness. You endured the death that we could never endure, and you lived the life that we could never live, so that we could receive the promise that you have made. So, Lord, help us to understand these stories not simply as accounts of things that happened long ago to other people, but challenges that are still persistent in our own lives. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.